Hey Unwrappers, just before we begin this week's show, I wanted to let you know about the daily digital digests, also from the week. With everything you need to know in one balanced read, the week's daily digital digests give you space to reflect on the news, away from the noise. You can try 6 weeks for free in our winter sale and then save an extra 30% on an annual digital or print and digital subscription. Just enter the offer code WINTER at theweek.com/offer to start your free trial today. That's theweek.com/offer and the offer code WINTER. And now on with the show. It's the week ending Friday the 24th of January, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen President Trump signing hundreds of executive orders, including pardoning all the January 6th rioters, Prince Harry receiving substantial damages after settling his legal claim against the Sun, and Formula One star Lewis Hamilton dressed in red for the first time as he debuts for Ferrari. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team is Irenie Forshaw. We welcome back journalist Catriona Stewart from Scotland and also former political editor of the Sunday Mirror, Vincent Moss. Just quickly on the big political controversy of the week, was that a deliberate Nazi salute or not? Vincent?
No, but he knew what he was doing.
Irenie?
He definitely knew what he was doing, yeah.
Catriona?
Yes.
2 against 1. I'll remain on the fence. Catriona, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The week that man versus machine became less a battle and more a collaboration.
You strap on, get plugged in.
I got a whole audience here.
Yeah, there's so many audience here.
I'm about to put on a show.
I was retrofitted with their HFIT system, which has motorized units that can improve your efficiency when running. Athletes can use this when training for sports. I was actually able to enhance my speed from 21 kilometers per hour to 26 kilometers per hour. Nowhere near Olympic athlete levels, but almost.
A video this week from YouTuber Hip Hop Science trying out some new tech at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Catriona, what's the story?
Well, anyone among us forced to learn a musical instrument as a child, or certainly the parents who had to listen to the fledgling attempts at scales and 3-note compositions, knows how tedious and tough practice is, but practice makes perfect, right? And there is no way around it. But maybe there is. Scientists in Japan have developed a fast-track way of improving instrument skill levels. So there now exists a robotic exoskeleton that you wear like a glove, and it moves piano players' fingers at a speed faster than they would manage on their own. There's apparently a ceiling effect, so even if you're a virtuoso musician, you can't improve your dexterity beyond a certain point. But the glove apparently retrains your brain to think that your fingers can move faster than they naturally can. So even when you take the glove off, it was found that pianists can still play better than before. But is this really the future? And what are the ethical implications?
Hold on. It trains your brain to think your fingers can move faster than they actually can. But surely the speed at which they actually can is the limit of how fast they actually can.
Well, this is the whole point of the technology, Ollie. So the test for it is sort of nuts, right? So the scientists stimulated the pianist's brains with electrodes to see which neurons in the primary motor cortex moved when they were playing the piano. And they did it with a helmet that emits a magnetic field. And then after using the glove, when the helmet came off, the same neurons moved, which made the scientists come to the conclusion that what the glove was doing was it was rewiring neural pathways. So naturally you hit a ceiling. Even if you are the best pianist in the world and you practice all the time, you can only get to a certain point. Whereas this glove is ultimately changing your brain so that your body can do things that it couldn't do previously.
Wow. I mean, the human hand, Irenie, is complex. Does it surprise you that it's possible for a robot to imitate any part of it in technology?
Yeah, I think, our hands perform thousands of complex tasks every day. We've got more than 30 muscles and 27 joints in our hands. They've got 27 degrees of freedom. So, even things that we would think are relatively simple, like picking up a pen and writing something down, actually requires this complex combination of motor control and sensory feedback. And, nothing's really been able to come close to just what hands can actually do, until we're starting to see things like this.
You do wonder, Vincent, where this technology is going. I mean, Catriona's talking about it as a training device, but if it actually was able to manipulate your fingers whilst you're playing the piano, could it be used in a concert? I'm thinking about the film Gattaca from 1997, when they go to see a piano concert and the pianist is playing the piano with 12 fingers because it's a piece that can only be played with 12 fingers. And that was a kind of look into the future of where we're going with DNA manipulation. But could it be here via robotics?
Well, I think so, and I think that seems to be where these things will always naturally end. And not only could it do that function, but it could nearly always, almost certainly, do it better. So you end up with not having human pianists or not having human surgeons, because these robotic hands or any other limb would be able to perform the function quicker, better, faster and more efficiently. One of the reasons why many top surgeons have to stop at some point is because their hands aren't as steady. Presumably the same happens to pianists and other specialists. So I think the logical conclusion, with a lot of these things is great at the outset, looks like an advance, but you do wonder where it ends up.
Yeah, I mean, Catriona, a bit of a spoiler, but there's a thread running through your stories this week. All of the stories we're talking about this week are sort of about how technology is changing our lives. And in this case, people may say this looks like a great thing to use to practice with, but the obvious concern will be, is it really you anymore if you're being controlled, if you're being manipulated?
Yeah, so at the moment this glove can't move your hand to play the piano, so it mimics the keystrokes, but you're sort of hovering your hand in midair. But the scientists are working on a glove that would play the piano for you when you were wearing it. And would you not be absolutely raging to be a really skilled musician who practices all day every day since the age of 3 and then discover that literally anyone could play better than you with a glove on? So I think there will be a bit of pushback, but I sort of worry about it as well, in that musical instrument tuition is dwindling, certainly in schools in Scotland. It was free for a very long time and now local authorities can't afford to provide it. So it's becoming quite elitist. Only certain children have access to it. And you wonder about technologies like this. Will it make high-level athletics and musical skills and all these sort of extracurricular things even more elitist, and allow some people to have access to very high-level skill sets and others not? And I know that that's very far off in the future, but I do think it's an interesting element of it.
I sort of always imagined the primary use for exoskeletons would be military, but there seem to be applications in all sorts of places.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting, the kind of similar sorts of technology that we're seeing that's kind of blending these areas. So in particular in prosthetics, I was reading about this woman, Sarah de Lagarde, who slipped in the gap on the tube and she ended up losing one of her legs and arms. At first, the NHS offered her this sort of very basic prosthetic arm that she could do barely anything with. And then after about 9 months, that wasn't going well, and they gave her a battery-powered bionic arm that uses AI to anticipate her movements by detecting these tiny electrical signals from her muscles. And so now, she said she can pick up an egg without cracking it. She can do all of these different tasks. I think we don't need to get too worried about it now, because that's taken decades and decades to get to that point. And she said she's still dropping things all the time. And I think there's a long way for those advances to go until it even be able to come anywhere close to what an actual human hand could do.
It's interesting though, isn't it, Kat? Because no one's going to say that kind of rehabilitative therapeutic technology is, something to be concerned about. Everyone's going to say that's brilliant. Someone who used to be able to walk can now be helped to walk again. But you've got a theory around this that people who are already able, who are not using this technology to fill in a gap, could start using it to become superhuman.
You make it sound like an unreasonable prospect, Olly. Do you know, one of the things that's interesting about this as well is that if I asked you to guess when the very first patent was approved for a powered exoskeleton, I bet you wouldn't get it right. It was...
Okay. Well, go on, don't tell me. You don't set a challenge and then bet that I wouldn't get it right and not give me the opportunity to fight for myself.
Go on, fight for yourself, Olly.
So the first powered exoskeleton...
It was a Russian inventor.
It's making me think space age, so that is sort of now earlier than I might have guessed. But I'll go for 80s. I'll go for late 80s.
1980s.
Okay, yeah. Well, there you go. So you lost your bet.
No. I'm reacting with surprise. When you say the 80s, do you mean
Yes.
the 1980s? Because you would be out by a century.
Oh, okay. Now I look stupid. Well done. All right. So how come?
I gave you the opportunity, Ollie, and you insisted. It's not my fault. So it was 1890.
Right.
So man has been attempting this for an extremely long time, and I think you cannot argue against exoskeletons for people who are in wheelchairs, and it gives them the opportunity to walk again. But those exoskeletons that were developed for that sort of use are now being used by runners to get faster. And these technologies are going to be evolved. And I do think you lose something from human endeavour if you are just using robots to cheat, essentially. But maybe we will see a time where everybody has wide-ranging skill sets, because even if we don't want to practice our instruments, or we don't want to have to go out and do couch to 5k before we start running marathons, just put on a suit and you'll be able to do it.
Well, I mean, what about in the rules of war, Vincent? Is it cheating? I mean, I mentioned the military technology. That's the most obvious place, isn't it? You put an exoskeleton on and you can carry more stuff up a hill. So is that cheating? Or is that just, using technology to make your army better?
Well, it would feel like the logical progression, I think, to me in many ways, because our tolerance for how many people we would accept can die in a war, certainly in the West, and we probably exclude Russia, for example, from that at the moment, that seems to be able to tolerate very high casualty counts. But in the West, and certainly when Britain's been involved in conflicts in recent years, even to lose 100 lives or 20 lives is seen as unacceptable in many circumstances. So the logical conclusion of warfare would be to use more technology and exactly these sort of structures to get into areas and to scope out areas. You see that with drone technology already in existing conflicts in the Middle East and other places. But when it comes into perhaps street-to-street battles, with very dangerous, probably the most dangerous form of warfare, at the moment that's still largely done by humans. But the more logical progression of that would be to use these exoskeletons and use them to go into dangerous areas that could be mined, have IEDs and other things. So it feels to me the logical progression with our low tolerance for casualties would be to use exactly these kind of technologies.
And do you think, therefore, Irenie, that the logical progression of this sort of thing, the glove, is what Catriona was talking about there, that people who don't need it will use it? It's the Neuralink thing as well, isn't it? Elon Musk's digital technology in people's heads. That's a rehab therapy tool now. But especially coming from someone like him, we know he wants to colonise Mars. He'd be interested in a race of superhumans that all had chips in their brains, whether they needed it or not, just to make us, quote-unquote, better.
Ollie, you've really escalated that. Superhuman robots on Mars.
I think as well, those things are so far from actually being the reality for a lot of people. Like, I was reading about this guy who had an electronic brain implant put into his head, and then he couldn't walk before, and then it could wirelessly transmit this signal to his legs and feet and then to his spine. He's one example of that, but everybody was stressing that this isn't going to be available for the vast majority of people for like years and years and years. So I don't know if that's something we need to worry about quite yet.
Okay. Let's see if you need to worry about our next story. Why you'll be collecting pixels on your passport soon, not stamps. That's after this. Okay, Vincent, it's your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is the government's latest tech announcement an easy way of proving who you are in the pub to get a drink, or is it part of something more sinister and a Big Brother plan?
We're making government services easier to access than ever before by putting them in your pocket. Soon, you'll be able to use the new gov.uk app to manage all your government activity in one place.
Wow, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology are so funky. A video there they posted on Tuesday. Vincent, what was the government launching there?
Well, essentially what they're saying and launching is a new app that's going to make your life easier, or that's the spin. You'll be able to get all your documents in one place eventually, starting with things like your driving licence, and if you're a veteran, a veteran's card. So if you're going to the pub or you need to prove your age, you can just show it on an app, a bit like an Apple wallet. The ID will be there, and you're able to get these services and eventually be expanded so you could have birth certificates, things that help you get your benefits, and other kind of entitlements, student loans, and you'll be able to deal with things, access things, and make appointments with the council and things like that in a way you can't at the moment. And theoretically, you won't be on hold for hours. You won't be your drawers overflowing with all these government letters, as Peter Kyle, the technology minister, put it. It'll all be there on a handy app. But I wonder if it's really that straightforward.
Well, I mean, you were knocking around the block as a political editor back when ID cards were a contentious subject. And people who were against the idea of the Labour government introducing ID cards because of Big Brother type concerns would say that this goes way above and beyond what they were planning then with a piece of plastic with your face on it. This is all of your documents in one digital wallet.
That's right. I mean, I remember when in about 2011, Tony Blair was a huge fan of ID cards to stop illegal immigration, to crack down on crime and things like that. One of the big problems with gangs who are involved in crime is it's very easy to get a fake national insurance number. Now, theoretically, if you had an ID card with your face on it and all sorts of other details, it would be much harder to do those things. Now, that idea was very much killed by civil liberties people. Only a few thousand got issued and it died and it's gone away. But civil liberties people are worried that this could be the start of, once you start getting that sort of information in there, it could be used to control immigration. You could be stopped in the street and asked for your ID. So it sounds like a happy, clappy, nice thing that will improve your life, but there are very real concerns from Big Brother Watch and others that this could be the start of a path towards digital ID and having to prove your identity. What happens in other countries to some extent doesn't happen here, and that does worry people. And significantly, and the government have said, doesn't rule out where it's going with this in the long term.
Does it surprise you that a Labour government has come back and effectively relaunched ID cards? I mean, considering they were burned by it quite badly the first time round and the public made it clear they didn't want them.
Well, that's right. But I think it's that split again, because the government desperately wants growth, and it's convinced that the key way to growth is through artificial intelligence. Peter Kyle, the technology minister, is the Silicon Valley minister, he's called by some people. He's very pro-AI. The government thinks it's going to save them loads of money, create loads of jobs, and this is part of that revolution as it sees it. But it isn't really as simple as that, because of this element where you could be in a position where you're forced to show this app and prove who you are. A good thing in many ways if you want a discount or a benefit, but potentially a very worrying thing if A, you're not into that stuff, or B, it's done without control. There's also the security element as well. If you lose this document or people can hack into this, they've literally got everything they need to create crime and cause you problems.
I suppose to an extent it depends how much you trust the government to implement technology, Irenie, because, you know, we're not in the 90s or the noughties anymore. Because of the likes of Meta, there's our facial recognition all over the internet anyway. Our identities can be hacked anyway. Some people would feel more secure having an official government thing that they can point to, and some people would say the government can't be trusted with that kind of information. Maybe it just depends where you fall on that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, there's been so many examples in the news of kind of huge data breaches that there's been, you know, so it doesn't exactly fill you with confidence. And the kind of reaction to the news from privacy campaigners, they've said, you know, this could actually turn into a nightmare because of how much data will be available, and it could just end up really reducing the control that we have over our personal data. You know, at the moment they're saying that we're still going to be able to use our physical passports, but that hasn't actually been enshrined in law, so people are kind of nervous that this is like a slippery slope and that they end up taking that away, and then people are in a position where, you know, they're relying on these digital passports, and that ends up alienating people who are kind of vulnerable and don't have as much access to technology.
And if this does get expanded to passports, Catriona, there is an obvious benefit, which is you're less likely to lose your phone than your passport. You're used to looking after your phone all the time.
Do people commonly lose their passports? I'm not sure that they do, Ollie.
I mean, maybe it's just my mother, but I spent a torturous hour trying to order her an emergency passport just 3 weeks ago after she dropped hers down the side of a bench in Ibiza. But, you know.
Well, hats off to your mum for being out raving in Ibiza. Irene's nodding her head away at the notion of losing your passport.
I had like the worst moment, one of the worst travel experiences ever, and actually ended up missing my flight because just before the flight, my boyfriend just went to go and get his passport and he was like, it's gone. It's not in the drawer where it always is. And
anxiety dream.
Yeah, it was like a gut-wrenching moment, and it ended up that, his friends had hidden his passport, so it was a nightmare, and we ended up missing our flight. But so I guess I can kind of see both sides of the argument for having a passport or not.
And I've left mine in the hotel safe before, so thinking I'll put my passport in the hotel safe, that's a brilliant idea.
Yes, it's only you, Catriona, that doesn't lose your passport. Everyone else has.
What's wrong with you people? What is wrong with you people? I'm bamboozled. My brain cannot compute. I need a microchip or some kind of exoskeleton helmet to try and make me understand how you could possibly lose your passport. My passport is one of my absolute prized possessions, but in saying that, it is perhaps because I have an Australian passport, and those things cost like 700 quid. And as someone in Scotland, you have to go to London to get them, so it's a big faff. I'm more likely to be without a smartphone. As the Week Unwrapped's resident Luddite, I only upgraded my phone about 18 months, 2 years ago. So I had an iPhone 3 for about 13 years.
Wow. Okay.
Indeed.
Did that even do WhatsApp?
No, it didn't. No, it didn't. And we give all sorts of reasons. I mean, at the moment, only 5% of UK residents don't have a smartphone. And interestingly, only 3% of UK 12-year-olds don't have a smartphone. And you would think that it would be logical to say, well, folk like me, old dinosaurs, are going to eventually go extinct. And the 12-year-olds of today will all, 100% of them will have smartphones when they're older. But actually, younger generations are giving up their smartphones and going back to Nokia bricks because they don't want the constant distraction. There's developments in technology and then there's frustrations with technology. But for me, it's just a case of I just didn't want to. I just don't want to be compelled to have a smartphone.
Well, it's worth saying at the moment they're not compelling people, right? This would be voluntary. You can choose to have this or not.
No, indeed.
At the moment.
But I mean, I think people sort of find that they have to come up with, because it's so normalised to have a smartphone, people have to come up with reasons for not wanting to have one, or they're a bit bonkers. But actually, you can just not want to, and that's absolutely fine.
Not if you want to park in my local arts centre. You need your phone, otherwise you cannot buy a parking ticket these days. The machine doesn't take credit cards. You need cash or your phone.
So you are being compelled in certain circumstances to have a smartphone.
If you don't carry coins, who does?
I find that really frustrating. But I also love my passport. I do a lot of travel. Travel's one of my favourite things. And getting the stamps in the passport is one of my favourite things, my sort of souvenir from my holidays. So I think if my flat went on fire, the thing that I would grab would be my passport.
I mean, that's very romantic because we're talking about passports, but Vincent, you think about all the paper we used to have in our filing cabinets, everything from kind of contracts on our energy supply to TV licenses. It's quite nice that gets emailed to us these days, isn't it? You still have the choice to have the paper statement if you want it, but for the rest of us, we just don't need to keep that much paper anymore.
No, that's right. And I think things like that, you can see the advantages and you can see the benefits. I think the more alarming potential aspect of it is if you are required and perhaps you're stopped walking down the street by the police or whoever, and there's a suggestion you are asked to prove who you are. Now, at the moment, you don't need to do that. But the creeping advancement of this and Big Brother Watch and people like that are very worried about the fact that no guardrails have been set out on this, and where could it end? And they are worried that it could mean that you have to prove who you are, and it will become a default thing almost, if you like, that, well, why wouldn't you want to prove who you are? What are you up to?
That's clearly the position in America at the moment, isn't it, politically? It would be a popular idea to say you need to prove whether you have a status in this country or not, otherwise we're going to deport you. I mean, that is like mainstream politics now. Maybe the mood has shifted on it.
Yeah, 100%, and I think that's the fear that it could happen here. We all know that one of the big key topics in politics here remains immigration, and particularly illegal immigration. And if you got to a point where people could be stopped and asked to prove their status, literally where they were from and where they were born, and this technology could certainly be used in the years ahead to do that, that's an alarming possibility and should certainly be the subject of a debate and a discussion rather than something potentially that's just sold as a positive government happy app where you lose all your paperwork, so it's a good thing really. So it could be by stealth something that's a bit more alarming than it first appears.
I guess as well, if it does become your actual identity document, Irenie, that it sort of requires some international cooperation that maybe isn't in place at the moment. I noticed even this app that the government are developing, they've kind of said, well, we'll talk to the tech companies about how it sits on their phones. And I was thinking, talk to them? I mean, this should be developed absolutely with them in terms of its encryption and everything else, because everyone basically has a Samsung or an Apple smartphone. So why aren't you talking to them?
That's the thing. It's still at a kind of very early stages in that sense. I also think it's quite scary that now if you had your phone stolen, it's like before, okay, you could have your cards and you could just quickly cancel them. But to have your whole identity on your phone, and to have all of that information that could then be stolen is kind of scary. And it made me think about during the lockdowns when people downloaded the COVID apps, and there was kind of a bit of a backlash because the Singapore police started using info from that for criminal investigation. So it's kind of like, as soon as you start doing something like this, it's kind of scary where it ends up. With regard to international cooperation, we're still at relatively early stages with this. Finland was the first country in the world to issue digital passports, and that was only in 2023. But obviously that technology can only be used with other countries that are cooperating with it. And so, it's currently still very limited to what airports you can even use that technology at. The EU has said that it wants at least 80% of its country citizens to use digital ID for travel by 2030. So it's kind of like that's looking like more the timeline, that in order for this to actually make a difference to like going to the airport and not needing to bring your physical passport, it's like the technology kind of needs to catch up.
Incidentally, Catriona, I may have lost the bet on exoskeleton patents, but whilst we've been talking, producer Olly has been Googling, and according to government figures, almost 400,000 UK passports are reported lost or stolen each year, versus 300,000 phones. So I was right.
Who are these morons?
A factor of 25%.
Who are these idiots, these complete morons? Honestly.
Well, they've got more valuable phones than an iPhone 3. That's why. I think we've solved it. Up next, find out the secret to Adrian Brody's Hungarian accent. That's after this. Okay, Irenie, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Will AI win its first Oscar?
How was it particularly getting into the accent for you? What was kind of the references there?
Well, it was a huge challenge. Yeah. It was a little bit intimidating at first, suddenly reading, oh my gosh, I've got to learn Hungarian and I've got to speak in a Hungarian accent. So I just quickly got to my desk and got practicing. And
Duolingo, was it?
Yeah, exactly. Listening to anything I could.
Actress Felicity Jones speaking to TNM News on the red carpet on Tuesday about her role in The Brutalist, big Oscar contender. Irenie, what's the story?
So this week, Brady Corbet, the director of the Oscar-nominated film The Brutalist, issued a statement after there was a huge online backlash to revelations that AI was used to tweak the Hungarian accents of two of the film's leads. So that was Felicity Jones that you just heard there, talking about how she spent so long preparing this accent. And so the news comes after an interview was published earlier in January with one of the film's editors, in which he revealed that in order to kind of create Hungarian dialogue that was so authentic that not even locals would be able to spot any difference, the actors' voices were fed into an AI model, and then together with the voice of the editor, who's a Hungarian speaker, technology was used from an AI company to enhance their dialogues. And it's important to note that it was just kind of little, like, he said, the performances were kept intact, but the odd letter and the odd kind of vowel was changed because it's such a tricky language to get hold of.
Yeah, so he's saying if you're English or American, trying to speak Hungarian is just really difficult, like trying to speak Mandarin. It's just a different register.
Exactly. And even for Adrian Brody, who, his mother emigrated to the United States from Hungary. So even for him, he couldn't manage to master the accent, apparently, or they still felt that they needed to use the AI. But basically, that interview, it was buried right at the end of a really long article, but then someone on a subreddit found out about it, and it sort of has blown up and reignited this huge ongoing debate about whether AI should actually be used in the editing suite and where you draw the line. And obviously The Brutalist was one of the favourites tipped for the Oscars, and the nominations are being announced this afternoon. So we'll find out, whether it impacts it. But a lot of people are saying, it should be disqualified. It's a disgrace.
Yeah, it's quite funny that, Catriona, I thought, because this interview was on this website that I've never seen before I think they're called Red Shark News, which appears to be quite a nerdy sort of thing for people who like camera lenses. Like, it's literally about what's the hardware that you use to make this film in the creative process, but it's about nerds, engineers, talking about hardware. And so they interviewed the editor at length. And as Irenie said, it's kind of at the end, kind of casually, flippantly, he's like, yeah, so we used AI. And people, it's a bit of a controversy around that, but there shouldn't be. And I think we're moving to a stage where this won't be an issue anymore. And of course, once the mainstream media's got hold of this article, they're like, you use what? And it's what? It's nominated for an Oscar. And it's not them talking.
Yeah, absolutely. They haven't been upfront about this at all, which is really interesting. It's exactly what we were talking about with the exoskeleton glove. Can you claim that this is your skill, your art form, when actually it's being artificially enhanced and you're not having to put the effort in to actually achieve the ultimate goal of your artistic output? I think it is one thing when it's being used in a film, though. I do think you have to declare it. I think you have to be upfront about it. But there are other moral and ethical complications. So this is a bit of shameless horn tooting, but I was working on a documentary recently with the BBC, and it's about a romance fraudster that I had written about when I was a newspaper reporter.
And what's the name of that show if we want to go and find it on iPlayer?
Thanks very much, Olly. It's BBC Disclosure. It's called Matched with a Predator.
Matched with a Predator. Yeah, you've been investigating that for many years, haven't you? We've talked about it on the show.
Yeah, I have for 6 years. And so in an instant like that, you have multiple female victims. It is very difficult for women to come forward and talk about these things because they feel a sense of shame, embarrassment. In some instances, there were assaults and sexual assaults, and so by law, they have to remain anonymous. And normally in a documentary situation, you would perhaps film somebody from the back, or you would have a silhouette, or you might even have an actor stand in and voice the part. But in this occasion, and I believe in Scotland it was the first time that this had been done in a BBC documentary, they used AI to replicate one of the women who was talking to us about her experiences with this conman.
Replicate her in what sense? Visually?
So, yes, and her voice as well. So she was filmed, she was interviewed and she was filmed talking about her experience. And at the same time, there were multiple cameras set up on her. And there was an AI expert there who then took that footage and sort of superimposed a different face onto the woman. So it was really interesting to watch, having seen her initially and then seeing the AI version of her. The mannerisms and the characteristics and the intonation of her voice were exactly the same, but it was a completely different face and it was a completely different
How did you feel about
voice.
that? I mean, would you have preferred it was an actor?
I was really hesitant about it initially because I think the media is so distrusted currently, and the mainstream media, and I hate that expression, but the mainstream media has a real job of work to persuade people that we are trustworthy, to be authentic in what we're producing. And the use of AI in the documentary was heavily caveated. When the woman was speaking, when she was presented on screen, it did say this is an AI reproduction. The thinking behind it is that it's more relatable and it's easier to watch than a silhouette. Somebody would rather see this woman and feel more empathy for this woman.
Just much as a Hungarian-speaking viewer might prefer to hear their language spoken accurately.
Exactly, to not be frustrated by the bastardization of the language. But you are asking people to, you know, this is a documentary, it's real life, and you're asking people to have faith in something that they're seeing with their own eyes, but that isn't actually real. And I think there's a lot of moral complexity around that, and it's something that needs to be discussed.
I mean, the analogue, it seems to me, Vincent, is with CGI. You know, I remember when Jurassic Park came out, and that was kind of the first big mainstream movie that used that technology, and so that was part of the sell. We've created these dinosaurs using just a computer. Come and see it. But now you wouldn't mention that Sonic the Hedgehog is composed of CGI because that's just obvious. The audience is media literate enough to understand that there's neither a man in a hedgehog suit nor a 2D animation going on there. It's something done by a computer, and that's just absolutely normal. So, you know, we're saying now it needs to be declared, but maybe in the future it'd just be like, well, of course, if they're speaking Hungarian, you're gonna feed that into a computer and make sure it sounds accurate. That's just what you'd do. That's the tool you'd use.
But I think there's a difference, and it's about transparency. I think it's fairly obvious, as you said, to hit the nail on the head. CGI is fairly obvious, and what's going on here is not obvious, really. And there's two elements to it, I think. The first bit of me wants to scream, but you're an actor. It's your job to learn different voices. That's literally what you're paid for. But I think the more nuanced position is that when you're using assistive AI, as we would call it, to clean up things, as we do with this podcast, for example, Olly, the producer, will clean up odd noises like my dog chewing his bone in the background, hopefully, and things like that. So that sort of stuff gets cleaned up, and I think that's fine, and we expect that.
It's a distortion of reality, though.
Yes, but only in a small way. I mean, you get that with cleaning up voices, taking out things that shouldn't really be there. It is a distortion of reality. But the real problem is generative AI, where you're using the AI to generate something new, and you're either telling people or not telling people about that. And I think that's massively different. We see that with music, where you can feed 1,000 songs into an AI bot and it creates something it claims is new, but in fact it's generative, and it's relied and prayed and used the works of other people, and maybe not even told the consumer or the music fan, or in this case the film fan, that's what's happened. And I think what's interesting, if you look at other films like the new Hugh Grant horror movie Heretic, they'd taken an AI, anti-AI stance, if you like, where the end credits say, and I think it's a good thing for transparency, no generative AI was used in the making of this film. And you've even seen it with the Emilia Perez film, where they've used AI cloning in that to sort of increase, as they say, the vocal register in that film, using a technology called re-speecher to blend in the singing. So it feels to me that it's acceptable, but don't hoodwink people. Tell them what you're doing, and you might need a disclaimer on the end of the movie saying, this is what we did.
Can you tell us a bit about re-speecher, Irenie, because they're the company involved in this particular scandal as well?
Yeah, but it's the same company. It's a Ukrainian company.
Which is a surprise. I mean, you're not really thinking about generative AI coming from Ukraine, are you?
Yeah, but I mean, they've worked on some pretty big projects, and I think it's interesting that everyone's so up in arms about this and saying, oh, maybe, you know, the Oscar should be, that he shouldn't be able to win an Oscar. But then something like Rami Malek, you know, he won an Oscar for his portrayal of Freddie Mercury in Bohemian Rhapsody, and it was the same thing. You know, that wasn't, they used tapes from Queen and they kind of merged it with his voice, you know, and it was a bit controversial at the time, but people kind of accept it. So it's like, is it just going to keep gradually setting the benchmark and moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, they're also the same company, aren't they, that simulate James Earl Jones's voice for Darth Vader in Star Wars. And obviously James Earl Jones has now passed on, so that is the only way to get his voice as Darth Vader. And you can't imagine Star Wars being excluded from consideration for Oscars in the future because they do that. It just seems an obvious way to achieve that result.
Well, exactly, yeah, you know, and some people would say, like, you know, as long as that one of the most important things is as long as the AI isn't being used in a way that actually means that people end up out of work, and it's used kind of just to enhance things, then it's okay. And I thought it was interesting. I saw something that Paul Schrader, who wrote the script for Taxi Driver, posted on Facebook saying that he had been experimenting with ChatGPT, and he said he wanted to get some ideas for some new films, and actually every single one of the ideas that were generated was really original and really good. He wasn't saying that to promote AI. He was kind of saying it's quite a scary thing.
Catriona, where do you think this is heading, particularly in regard to award season? I mean, is this something that because in Hollywood it's so contentious, isn't it, using AI in the way that Irenie just described? There's a writer's strike about it for months. Do you think they're going to get past it?
I think it depends on who's doing the voting for awards season. I think if the judges are very deliberately voting down productions that feature AI in this specific way, I mean, I think it's one thing to say that James Earl Jones' voice has been recreated. There's nothing you can do about that. He's not here anymore. But if it is someone who's an actor whose job is to accurately represent a scene or learn a new language or speak with a particular accent, then if they're not doing that, if they're using assistants to do that, then you are definitely losing something. But I think it depends how the industry's bothered about it. I think if films that otherwise would be winning awards and raking it in at the box office aren't doing that, then that will very quickly refocus minds in Hollywood. But also you have to think about the knock-on effects of that, because yes, we did have the writer's strike that went on for a significant amount of time. You have authors whose work is being mined for AI and they're not being paid for that. So there are real knock-on effects of this that are affecting people's livelihoods and their incomes, and everything comes down to money in Hollywood, doesn't it? So I think that will be the ultimate arbiter of where this goes next.
Isn't the risk with this you end up with a lot of just very good-looking men and women and their voices are completely created by AI, and you end up with a kind of glamorous sort of supermodel I suppose you get that to a certain extent anyway with Hollywood, don't you? But they're just very good-looking people, and their voices are just artificially created, which would be a real shame.
Well, it's very creepy. Did you see the new film with Tom Hanks and Robin Wright? It's called Here, and it's got terrible reviews. But basically, they use AI to have them to de-age them, so it's like them when they're 20, and they look. I watched the trailer, and they just look really strange.
They've got that uncanny thing going on. Yeah.
Something's not right, and also they're moving around as sort of, I guess, like a 60-year-old, but they're meant to be 20. It's just it's a bit disconcerting.
Okay, well, on that, we are going to wrap up this week's edition, but as a special extra treat for you all, I am going to let an avatar of me, created by text-to-speech AI, do my final link. So I'm going to sit back and drink a pina colada. Here goes. My thanks to Irenie, Vincent and Catriona. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and then tapping follow. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription. Just go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Well, Olly Mann's AI. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer Ollie Pert at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye. Don't think it really captured my essence. I think you can tell there's not life behind the eyes there. What do you think?
I don't think you're out of a job yet.
It's not very good at Gaelic.